Maybe you learned nursing from a correspondence course, Torres. That is what Dr. Whitfield said 47 minutes before the commander's heart stopped beating. Rachel Torres stands at the back wall of the conference room at Seattle General in Houston, temp nurse badge clipped to scrubs 2 sizes too large, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like trapped insects. The projector casts her shadow across the far wall, gray and formless. 30 residents sit in tiered seating, laptops open, coffee cooling in their hands. Dr. Whitfield stands at the front with a laser pointer, circling her medication chart in violent red strokes. The antiseptic smell is thick enough to taste bleach and something chemical, something that sticks to the back of the throat. This patient, Whitfield announces, tapping the screen, received 4 doses of metoprolol separated by only 2 hours. 4 doses. Can anyone tell me why this represents a dangerously outdated protocol that could cost this hospital millions in malpractice exposure? He doesn't wait for an answer. Because whoever administered these medications was operating without the competence to back it up. His voice carries the particular venom of a man who has never been questioned. His suit costs more than Rachel's monthly rent. The lake house photo on his credenza shows a 3-story colonial with a dock stretching into dark water. Rachel's jaw is relaxed. Her hands are clasped behind her back. Her breathing is steady, diaphragmatic, the kind of breathing that comes from 18 years of staying still when staying still mattered. She has been humiliated in front of worse than residents. She has been humiliated in front of commanders who could order her into combat and ordered her to smile while it happened. This is nothing. This is the opposite of something. This is a man in an expensive suit playing with institutional power like a child with a toy he doesn't understand could break him. The resident steal glances at her. She is the thing they are being taught to despise. She is incompetence. She is the cautionary tale. She is the reason they will triple-check their dosages and never, ever trust a temp worker with real responsibility. Whitfield clicks to the next slide. Her name, highlighted in yellow. Torres has been floating through our system for 8 weeks. 8 weeks. No permanent placement, no references we can fully verify, and a work history with more gaps than continuity. The question I pose to you is this: would you trust this person to manage your medication administration? The room remains silent. Not a questioning silence. A condemning silence. Rachel notices things others miss because noticing things is a skill refined through repetition and survival. Whitfield's imaging center invoices, visible on the clipboard he left on the podium during the brief, show charges at precisely 312% above market rate. The radiology orders come through his private billing code rather than the standard hospital pathway. 2 of the attending physicians in the back row defer to him about imaging studies with an unusual pattern of deference, not collegial, but deferential, the body language of people who have something to lose. His watch is a Rolex Submariner, the model that costs $18,000. His loafers are Italian leather. His cufflinks are gold. These are the accessories of a man who is winning, who is absolutely certain he will continue winning, who has built his certainty on the backs of people smaller than him. Thank you, residents, Whitfield says, closing his laptop. Remember, credentialing exists to protect the hospital, not the individual. Some people need to understand there are standards. He doesn't look at her when he says it. He doesn't need to. Everyone in the room knows exactly who he means. The residents file past Rachel on their way out. 2 attending physicians, Dr. Chen and someone she hasn't met, pause by the vending machine in the hallway. Their voices carry the false privacy of people who think distance equals safety. Did you hear the temp nurse scored the radiology setup? One of them laughs, that particular kind of laugh that sounds like a knife being sharpened. Probably can't even spell pericardiocentesis. I'm not letting her touch my patient's charts. The other one snorts. Whitfield's right. Where does a temp come from with that kind of work history? Probably bounced from 12 hospitals before landing here. Rachel walks past them without changing her pace. Her left leg carries a limp that gets heavier as her shift wears on, but not now. Now she moves like someone who has nothing to prove. The fluorescent lights buzz and flicker. A nurse calls a stat page overhead. A ventilator wheels past on a stretcher, a patient inside somewhere Rachel will never see. The medical records are sealed. The hospital doesn't know she was in Baghdad. They don't know she pulled a Marine commander out of a firefight with 3 rounds passing through her own abdomen because the medevac was 20 minutes away and his spinal cord was severed and he was going to die right there on the dust unless she carried him. They don't know she wrapped his wounds with gauze she tore from her own uniform. They don't know her name was ordered erased from every official document because what happened in that firebase was classified so deep the Pentagon itself became a redaction. The military challenge coin sits in her locker downstairs, tarnished silver with an eagle stamped on one side and a motto she hasn't read in 3 years. She touches it every morning before her shift, her thumb running across the worn edges. That coin is the only proof Rachel Torres was ever anyone other than a temp nurse in scrubs that don't fit. Every official record has been scrubbed. Her service record exists in a storage unit 3 states away, locked in a climate-controlled box. Her Master Chief Petty Officer insignia is hidden there too, pressed flat against papers that confirm her rank, her medal count, her clearance level, her unit designation. The hospital has no idea. Room for 47 is on the 4th floor, the cardiac intensive care wing. The patient is a Marine commander admitted through the emergency department with sepsis and a central line infection, his medical record flagged as unknown patient, classified. No next of kin listed. No emergency contacts. No information beyond his social security number, which is locked in an encrypted system even Whitfield doesn't have access to. He has been sedated and mechanically ventilated for 6 days. His eyes remain vacant, his expression locked in a place between consciousness and something deeper. Rachel enters at 0600 with the vital signs cart. Her shift starts at 7, but she always comes early to check on the critical patients. The room is dim except for the monitor light casting blue shadows across his face. The ventilator hisses every 4 seconds, a rhythm she can match in her sleep, a rhythm that has been playing in the back of her mind since her first deployment to Sanjin Valley, Helmand Province. That was 23 years ago. That was a lifetime ago. She checks the endotracheal tube first, making sure the secure tape hasn't loosened. His breath moves through the plastic tube in steady mechanical intervals. Then the central line, clean and intact. Then the arterial line, the 4 fluids, the monitors. Her hands move through the checklist without thought, muscle memory made flesh, the kind of competence that comes from doing something 10,000 times under conditions that demanded perfection or death. She is reaching for his wrist to check his radial pulse when his eyes open. They are blue. She remembers blue eyes. She remembers them open in a Humvee in a place where the heat made the air shimmer like water. She remembers them fixed on her face while she applied a tourniquet to his left leg, blood soaking through the fabric of his uniform faster than she could manage it. She remembers him trying to speak through the pain and her telling him no, save it, we're moving. His gaze slides past her like she is transparent. No recognition. No spark. Just the empty stare of a man whose brain is somewhere the sedatives have taken it, some darker place where memories haven't been filed yet. She finishes checking his vitals. Blood pressure stable at 132/80. Heart rate 78, steady sinus rhythm. Oxygen saturation 96% on the ventilator settings. Everything is normal. Everything is stable. Everything is exactly as it should be. She looks at the security bracelet on his wrist. Unknown patient, classified. His tattoo runs down the inside of his right forearm, text in military font, the kind of tattoo a man gets when he needs to carry something with him always. The letters spell out her full name, Rachel Valkyrie Torres. She has never asked him why. She has never asked him anything. She has never even introduced herself. The commander's eyes close again. The sedatives pull him back into that darker place. The ventilator hisses. The monitors beep their steady rhythm. Rachel leaves the room at 0623, exactly as scheduled, exactly as if nothing happened. Her locker is in the basement, a metal compartment identical to 47 others, her name taped to the front with white medical tape. Inside, on the top shelf, sits the challenge coin. She touches it now, running her thumb across the eagle, across the motto she knows by heart even though she hasn't read it in 3 years. Semper Fidelis. Always faithful. The motto of the Marines. The motto she lived by for more time than she has lived as a civilian. The motto that follows her like a ghost. The coin is tarnished. That's the thing that gets to her every time. The tarnish is from Baghdad dust, from blood that wouldn't wash off, from 18 years of being stored in a place she is no longer supposed to access. It's the only object on earth that proves what she was. Everything else has been erased. She hears footsteps in the stairwell. Residents moving between floors. She closes the locker and heads upstairs to begin her shift, the limp slightly more pronounced now, her left leg tired from a wound that never quite healed right. The pain is just information. Pain is data. The body keeps score even when the mind is trying to forget. The 4th floor is beginning to wake up. Nurses are running morning medications. A doctor is reviewing overnight labs at a computer station. Someone is drawing blood from a patient 3 rooms down, the rubber tube making a crisp sound as it's tied off. The hospital smells like coffee and disinfectant and something underneath both of those things, something like fear, something like sickness, something like people trying to survive another day. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the waiting. The 70-inch screen flickered to life during grand rounds, and Dr. Whitfield's laser pointer traced a red circle around Rachel's handwriting like a surgeon marking a tumor. 3 dozen residents and attending physicians filled the conference room at Seattle General, their attention fixed on the medication chart magnified across the wall, Rachel's precise documentation of insulin dosing, fluid balance, ventilator settings. Her penmanship was military clean, every number legible, every timestamp exact. Whitfield saw incompetence. He saw an opportunity. "Notice the entries here," he said, the laser pointer dancing across the screen. "This is what dangerously outdated protocols look like. This is 1990s thinking masquerading as modern nursing." He circled another notation. "The temp nurse," he paused, letting the word hang like a slur, "has documented treatments we abandoned 2 decades ago. Notice the medication dosing intervals. Notice the lack of integration with our current electronic protocols." His voice carried the precision of someone who had practiced this speech. "This is exactly how hospitals lose malpractice suits. This is how we hemorrhage millions in liability. And I'm recommending immediate review of every patient file touched by this individual." Rachel stood at the back of the conference room, hands loose at her sides, breathing unchanged, eyes forward on nothing in particular. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song above her. She had stood in briefing rooms with 3-star generals. She had listened to casualty reports in tents that smelled like diesel fuel and blood. This was noise. This was a man with a laser pointer trying to prove something to residents who would forget his name by Friday. Her jaw tightened once, a muscle flickering near her ear, then went still. Perfect composure. The kind that came from understanding that anger was a luxury and she couldn't afford luxuries. Scattered nervous laughter rippled through the room. A resident in the front row, a young, nervous energy vibrating off him, made eye contact with the attending next to him and smiled like they'd just been let in on a secret. Whitfield continued his dissection of her chart, each phrase calibrated for maximum damage, each pause designed to let the humiliation settle into the walls. Rachel's peripheral vision caught movement, the hospital administrator standing in the doorway, watching, taking notes. Then turning and leaving without a word. By 13:30 hours, Rachel was refilling her coffee at the 3rd-floor vending machines when 2 attendings positioned themselves 6 feet away, voices pitched just loud enough to carry. The blonde one, Dr. Kendrick, spoke first, his tone theatrical. "Did you see the temp's notes on the post-op anterior fossa case? Train wreck. Complete train wreck. She probably can't even spell pericardiocentesis." The other, older, with a wedding ring that caught the fluorescent light, snorted into his energy drink and shook his head like he'd just witnessed something tragic. Rachel's hand didn't shake as she added creamer to her coffee. The cardboard cup didn't crumple under her grip. She didn't spill a drop as she stirred. She walked past them with her eyes on the middle distance, the way you moved past furniture in a room you'd memorized long ago. She could have corrected them. She could have spelled it pericardiocentesis. She could have told them she'd performed the procedure in field hospitals with nothing but a needle, an ultrasound probe, and a patient hemorrhaging into his own chest cavity. Instead, she walked to the nurse's station and checked the next round of orders. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was watching Dr. Whitfield work. At 1,615 hours, Whitfield intercepted her outside the ICU in front of 4 nurses, a respiratory therapist, and 2 orderlies. An audience. Everything Whitfield did was a performance, and he never performed without witnesses. Torres, I need to be clear about something. His voice carried down the corridor like a radio broadcast. You ask too many questions. Questions about billing. Questions about our imaging center protocols. Questions about procedures that frankly aren't your concern. He stepped closer, invading the space between them. This is a warning. If you continue to demonstrate this level of insubordination and incompetence, security may need to escort you from the premises. Do you understand me? Rachel met his eyes. She saw the fear underneath the aggression, the kind of fear a man carries when someone knows something he's desperate to keep hidden. She'd seen that look in Baghdad, on the faces of officers who knew they'd made mistakes that cost lives. She nodded once. Yes, Dr. Whitfield, she said. Her voice was flat as a lake before dawn. No tremor. No anger. No emotion at all. Just a statement of fact. She returned to her med cart and continued the insulin rounds as if he'd commented on the weather. The other nurses watched in silence. The respiratory therapist looked away. Whitfield retreated, his jaw tight, because he'd expected something different: tears, anger, a cracking voice, and her perfect composure felt like a slap. She hadn't given him the satisfaction of breaking. Only in the stairwell between floors, alone in the concrete echo chamber, did Rachel press her palm against the cinder block wall and close her eyes. Her breathing remained steady. Her heart rate stayed controlled. But her hand, the one that had held wounded Marines while rounds came down around her, the one that had tied off arterial bleeds with paracord and duct tape, that hand pressed against the wall like she was testing whether it would hold her weight. 7 seconds. She gave herself 7 seconds. Then she descended the stairs back to the ICU where her patients were waiting. At 1847 hours, Rachel sat in the break room, alone, with her personal journal open to the page for Thursday. She documented the day in her own shorthand, the date, the time stamps, the specifics of what Whitfield had said, how he'd said it, who had witnessed it. This was discipline. This was the same methodology she'd used to write after-action reports in Baghdad, the same careful documentation that had kept her sane during 14-month deployments. She wrote, Drive W escalating campaign credentials. Isolated public humiliation in grand rounds, medication chart, laser pointer. Later, corridor warning insubordination. Tone suggests financial motive, imaging center. Pattern suggests fear of exposure. Hospital administration present at grand rounds, took no action. She closed the journal and locked it in her locker next to the tarnished challenge coin, the only 2 pieces of evidence that she was ever anyone other than Rachel Torres, temp nurse. At 19:20 hours, the evening shift change brought a shift supervisor and 2 nursing administrators into the hallway near the medication dispensary where Rachel was pulling antibiotics for a septic patient. She didn't mean to hear them. They didn't mean for her to hear them. But voices carry in hospitals, especially after sunset when the daytime chatter has been swept away by the night shift's quiet focus. We should probably flag her file, one of the administrators, a woman named Patterson, said quietly. Credential concerns. Background gaps. If something goes wrong, we need documentation that we were aware of potential issues. The other administrator, younger, hesitant, but she's competent. She hasn't made a single medication error. Her documentation is actually. It doesn't matter, Patterson interrupted. It matters what we can prove. Whitfield's making noise about liability, and if there's even a possibility of exposure, we need to be protected. Flag the file. Make a note. Cover ourselves. Rachel's hands didn't pause as she pulled the vials, arranged them in the medication drawer, confirmed the patient name and room number. But her mind was calculating. They were moving into position. Whitfield had turned the hospital's fear into a weapon, and now the institutional machinery was grinding into motion. She'd seen campaigns like this in the military, the way a target gets isolated, documented, flagged. The way a paper trail gets constructed that makes firing someone feel inevitable. The emergency alarm from the ICU cut through the evening like a knife through silk, and Rachel's head snapped up at the same moment her body moved toward the sound. The fluorescent light seemed to buzz louder. The sterile air of the hospital filled her lungs like oxygen before a combat operation. Everything was about to change. The shift stretched thin at 11:47. Rachel pushed a medication cart down the fourth-floor corridor of Seattle General, the hospital settling into that particular quiet that comes just before midnight, when day staff has fled and night shift hasn't yet found its rhythm. The fluorescent panels hummed overhead, casting everything in that institutional white that made time feel suspended. Somewhere down the hall, a call light blinked unanswered. Somewhere else, a monitor beeped its steady rhythm like a metronome measuring out a life in regular intervals. Room for 47 glowed softly when she passed it on her rounds, the commander sleeping on his back, one arm draped across his chest, the central line that delivered his antibiotics running clear and steady through the 4-pump. She'd checked it during the last round. Checked it twice, actually, though the second time was just an excuse to stand near the bed for 20 seconds longer than protocol demanded. His face in sleep looked younger. Less like the man who'd stopped recognizing her entirely. More like the commander who'd carried wounded Marines through Fallujah while taking fire from 3 directions, the one whose hand had gripped her shoulder in a Baghdad field hospital and said, "You're going to make it. You're going to make it out of here." She never had told him that he was the only reason she believed it. Rachel moved on. The foresight looked fine. The monitor tracings were textbook normal. Sinus rhythm, steady pressure, oxygen saturation 98%. She wrote it all down on the chart, routine documentation, meaningless entry in a meaningless night shift, and pushed the medication cart toward the next room. At 11:52, something shifted. Rachel was 2 rooms down when the first alarm sounded, not the routine beep of a monitor threshold crossed, but the hard shriek of the arrhythmia alarm, the sound that made every nurse's spine straighten like a compass needle finding north. She turned and ran. The code was in for 47. She knew it before the monitor display confirmed what her body already understood. The commander's rhythm had deteriorated into something jagged and wrong, his heart rate climbing toward 140, his blood pressure dropping fast enough to watch the numbers fall in real time. The central line had migrated. She saw it in the first 3 seconds of assessment, in the way his oxygen saturation was dropping despite the nasal cannula, in the gurgling quality of his breathing, in the bluish tint creeping into his lips like bruises. The line meant to deliver medication into his superior vena cava had drifted into the pericardial sac, the fluid-filled membrane surrounding his heart, and his own blood was pooling there, filling the space where his heart needed room to beat. Cardiac tamponade. His heart was drowning in its own fluid while his brain screamed oxygen deprivation signals his body couldn't answer. Dr. Chen, the on-call resident, froze in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds, just long enough for Rachel to recognize the look, the one she'd seen 15 years ago in field hospitals outside Baghdad when young doctors encountered catastrophic failure for the first time and realized that textbooks hadn't prepared them for the reality of someone actively dying in front of them. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. His hands rose and fell uselessly, like a bird that had forgotten how to fly. "We need the attending," Chen managed, his voice fractured. "We should wait for." "He doesn't have time to wait." Rachel's voice came flat and even, a temperature change in the room. She was already moving, already pulling the pericardiocentesis tray from the crash cart with hands that remembered every motion like muscle remembered how to breathe. The kit opened with a crack of sterile paper, the tools arranging themselves in her mind in perfect sequence, needle, syringe, ultrasound probe, sterile field. The attending was 20 minutes out in traffic, and the commander had maybe 3. 2 nurses responded to the code, night shift staff who knew Rachel as the quiet temp, the one who asked too many questions about the imaging center and Whitfield's billing practices, the one they pitied a little because she clearly didn't have the credentials for this work. Their hands moved on autopilot, one pushing medication, one drawing up labs, both watching Rachel with the particular expression of people witnessing something they didn't understand but recognized as important. Rachel prepped the commander's chest with betadine in concentric circles, the antiseptic smell cutting through sweat and the metallic tang of fear. Her hands moved like she'd done this yesterday instead of a decade ago. Like muscle memory wasn't forgetfulness at all, just patience waiting for the moment when it mattered. She positioned the ultrasound probe with her left hand, eyes on the screen, watching the dark pool of blood surrounding the heart like a siege around a fortress. "The needle," she said. Chen fumbled forward with the 18-gauge needle. His hands were trembling. Hers were steady as surgical steel. The monitor screamed. Blood pressure 78/52 and falling. Heart rate 142. The commander's color was shifting from gray toward something closer to ash. His breathing had become barely visible, his chest barely moving, his lips gone blue at the edges like frostbite in the middle of a Houston summer. Rachel angled the needle beneath the xiphoid process at precisely 45 degrees, advanced it slowly, watching the needle tip on the ultrasound screen approach the layer of blood surrounding the heart. The room went absolutely silent except for the monitor alarms and the commander's labored breathing, a silence so thick it had weight, so complete it pressed against the walls like something physical. The needle pierced the pericardium. Dark blood filled the syringe immediately. She aspirated slowly, methodically, watching the fluid come up, 50 cubic centimeters, 100, 150, 200. The commander gasped as the pressure around his heart released, his color shifting from gray to pink in real time, blood pressure climbing to 94/58, then 102/64. His heart rate dropped from 118 to 96. His oxygen saturation climbed toward normal. His lips changed color like someone had switched on a light underneath his skin. Rachel withdrew the needle, applied pressure with her gloved hand, secured a sterile dressing over the site. The procedure took 4 minutes and 11 seconds. She knew this because her mind had been tracking time since the moment the alarm sounded, keeping score of minutes and seconds the way a clock in a combat zone keeps score. Every second counted, every second was life. Dr. Morrison, the attending, burst through the door at 2:14 in the morning with his hair disheveled from the drive, his coat half-buttoned, clearly having run red lights from wherever he'd been. He stopped dead in the doorway, taking in the scene, the commander stabilized, the medication arranged, the crash cart already being reset, Rachel standing beside the bed with blood on her gloves and something in her eyes that made him forget how to ask the obvious question. What the hell happened here? Morrison finally managed. Dr. Chen found his voice, though it came out smaller than it should have. The central line migrated into the pericardial sac. Cardiac tamponade. She performed the pericardiocentesis. She aspirated 200 cc of fluid. She saved his life. Morrison stared at Rachel. His eyes moved from her gloves to her face to her posture, the perfectly calibrated stance, the breathing that hadn't changed, the expression of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before and would do it 1,000 times again. "You're a temp nurse," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." Rachel peeled off her gloves methodically, one finger at a time, turned the cuff inside out as she pulled them away from her skin. She didn't explain. Didn't justify. Didn't offer the kind of apology that temp nurses were supposed to offer when they saved lives that weren't technically supposed to be their responsibility. She simply walked out of the room, moved to the medication station, and began documenting the procedure in meticulous detail. Morrison and Chen stood speechless by the bedside while the commander's oxygen saturation continued climbing toward normal and his heart rate settled into the kind of steady rhythm that meant he would still be alive when the sun came up. But that wasn't the worst part for Dr. Whitfield. The worst part was that by morning, he would walk into Seattle General with his usual administrative armor, his power tie, his position, his connections to board members and insurance companies and administrative staff who knew which palms to grease and which questions to ignore. And he would discover that someone had saved the commander's life using the exact procedure and the exact medical judgment that Whitfield had publicly ridiculed in front of 30 residents just 6 hours earlier. The procedure he'd called dangerously outdated. The kind of thinking he'd suggested only someone with a correspondence course education would attempt. The medication chart he'd paraded around as evidence of incompetence would have to be reconsidered by everyone who'd heard him speak. The temp nurse had just become a problem that couldn't be handled with condescension anymore. She'd have to be handled with something worse. By 0800, Dr. Whitfield closed his office door and made the first call. His desk faced downtown Houston, floor-to-ceiling windows catching the morning light like chrome. The phone rang twice. "Mark, it's Richard." The board member's voice came back warm, familiar, the voice of a man who owed favors and knew exactly what they cost. "We have a liability issue," Whitfield continued, his tone dropping into the register of grave concern. A temp nurse performed an invasive cardiac procedure without direct physician supervision. Pericardiocentesis. Patient safety concerns, obviously. "I'll send documentation." Whitfield listened to Mark's response, smiled, hung up. One call leveraged. One call spent. The second call came at 0812. He'd already pulled the numbers from Rachel's employment application, the references she'd fabricated with impressive precision, each one a ghost hospital in ghost cities. He dialed the Kansas City number, reached the nursing supervisor. "This is Dr. Richard Whitfield, Seattle General in Houston. I'm verifying employment history for a Rachel Torres. Employed there 2015 through 2017. Long pause. He could hear the supervisor checking the system, the keyboard clicks like dominoes falling. "No record? I see. Thank you." He hung up before she could ask follow-up questions. 2 references destroyed. Her entire work history was now a house of cards with the first gust already blowing through. The third call at 0834 went to Jim Holloway at the State Medical Licensing Board. They played golf together every Thursday at the country club, a 6-handicap golfer with a 7-handicap ethics record. Whitfield kept his voice level, factual, the voice of a concerned colleague. "Jim, I need to file a formal complaint regarding credential irregularities. A nursing employee with gaps in her background, falsified references, performance of procedures outside her scope of practice." Jim asked questions. Whitfield answered each one with clinical precision, each answer another nail in Rachel's coffin. "I'll have the paperwork to you today," Whitfield said, and that was a promise he kept. Calls 4 and 5 happened in rapid succession. He'd already identified the attorneys, both partners at Crawford and Pierce, both specialists in employment termination litigation, both on retainer to the hospital for credential challenges. His conversations with them were models of legal choreography. "I need documentation of credential challenges and scope of practice violations," he told the first attorney. "Patient safety concerns. I want this handled delicately but decisively." The second attorney got the same message in slightly different words. By 0917, both had drafted preliminary termination language and sent it to the hospital's HR department. The machinery was moving now, gears catching teeth, momentum building. Call 6 went to Nursing Director Patricia HSU at 0921. "Patricia, we need to terminate Rachel Torres today. I have documentation of falsified references, unauthorized procedures, and patient safety violations. I'm recommending immediate termination without notice." Patricia said something about requiring more information. Whitfield's voice hardened just enough to make the request sound like an order. 1 hour. I'll have everything HR needs. This is urgent. He hung up and began typing, his fingers moving with the steady precision of someone who'd spent 2 decades burying problems. By 10:47, Rachel still hadn't received the summons. She was on the 4th floor, checking vitals on a post-operative patient, when her phone buzzed. A text from the nursing supervisor, report to HR 3rd floor. Now. No greeting. No explanation. Just the summons that every nurse learns to dread, the kind that means you don't get to finish your shift, don't get to say goodbye to your patients, don't get to pretend everything is normal for even another hour. When she walked into the HR conference room at 10:53, two representatives sat behind a table with manila folders positioned exactly where Rachel would see them. Patricia HSU stood by the window, her expression the careful blank of someone following a script. The HR woman spoke first. "Ms. Torres, we've discovered discrepancies in your employment history. References that don't check out, gaps in your background, and a concerning incident regarding a procedure you performed without proper supervision." The second representative slid the termination letter across the table. Rachel read it, the language precise, the accusations clinical, the finality absolute, unable to provide adequate documentation of clinical competency. Concerning gaps in professional employment history. Performance of procedures outside scope of practice. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. They gave her 15 minutes to clear her locker. A security guard was already waiting in the corridor, a younger man, maybe 35, with the rigid posture of someone who'd served. His name tag read Patterson. His eyes met Rachel's for exactly 2 seconds, long enough for recognition to flicker across his face, but he said nothing. Protocol. He'd escort her down, stand watch while she gathered her things, make sure nothing got taken that didn't belong to her. The basement locker room was empty at 12:04. Patterson stood 5 feet back, professional distance, while Rachel opened her metal compartment. The tarnished challenge coin came out first, the only physical proof she'd ever been anyone other than a temp nurse named Rachel Torres. She turned it over in her palm, the weight of 15 years compressed into 2 ounces of bronze and gilt. The unit photograph came next. She shouldn't have kept it, shouldn't have risked it, but she had. Her hands were steady as she placed both items in her small canvas bag. Then the protein bars, the extra pair of scrubs still folded in the plastic. The locker was empty in 90 seconds. Patterson's eyes lingered on the challenge coin, but his jaw stayed clenched and he didn't speak. Sometimes soldiers recognized other soldiers. Sometimes that recognition was worth more than words. Rachel turned and walked out, Patterson following 3 steps behind, through the employee entrance, past the loading dock where the morning sun was already hot on the concrete. She didn't look back at the hospital. She'd learned decades ago that looking back was a luxury only the living could afford. By 1800, Whitfield had sent encrypted emails to nursing directors at 14 major hospital systems across Texas. The message in each one was identical, carefully worded, devastatingly effective: patient safety concerns regarding temp nurse Rachel Torres. Terminated for credential falsification and unauthorized procedures. Available to discuss details confidentially. 14 rejection letters queued up and ready to go. She'd never work in Texas again. Not as a nurse. Not under her current name. That night at 0247, Rachel sat alone in a fluorescent-lit diner 7 miles north of the hospital, one of those places that never closed, that existed in permanent 3 in the morning time. A trucker slept in a corner booth, his head tilted against the window. The coffee in front of Rachel had gone cold an hour ago, still half full, a brown ring forming on the white ceramic where the cup met the counter. She stared at her reflection in the black window glass, a woman with hollow eyes, wearing civilian clothes that didn't fit right, her hair down instead of pinned, looking like something that had been emptied out and left in a parking lot to rust. The question that kept repeating, the one that wouldn't stop, was simple and impossible: did Master Chief Petty Officer Rachel Torres ever exist, or did she invent that version of herself to survive something she couldn't survive as who she really was? At the hospital, Seattle General continued its quiet night operations. On the 4th floor, the commander slept under thin blankets, his right arm exposed to the monitors, the tattoo on his forearm dark against his skin. Every 4 hours a nurse came in to check his vitals, not Rachel, someone else, someone who didn't know she'd saved his life, who would never know the cost of her composure, the price of her silence. But that wasn't the thing that would change everything. That would come with the sunrise. That would come with news that spread through the hospital corridors like lightning through water. That would come when the world finally remembered what it had thrown away. The hospital lobby was packed for the morning shift change when the news broadcast cut through the fluorescent hum like a rifle shot. Every screen above the information desk flickered in perfect synchronization, Channel 3's banner crawling across the bottom, Dodd press conference, Marine unit ambushed Baghdad 2009. The spokesperson stood at a podium flanked by flags, his voice formal and measured as he read names of the fallen and missing, unit citations, declassified operations finally making their way into public record after 15 years of redaction and silence. Then the photograph filled the screen. A younger face. Desert camouflage. Eyes that hadn't yet learned how to hold the weight of what they'd seen. Blonde hair tied back, jaw sharp as a blade edge. The caption burned below in white letters, decorated combat medic missing after classified operation, Rachel Torres, Master Chief Petty Officer, Navy Medical Corps. The lobby went dead silent. The commander was being wheeled past radiology by an orderly when he saw it. His eyes locked on the screen and his voice cut through the crowd like a rifle shot, loud enough to make 3 nurses jump. "That's Valkyrie. That's my Valkyrie." His hand shook as he gripped the wheelchair arms, his voice cracking on the name, the call sign she'd earned the day she carried him 6 miles with a shattered spine while taking fire in a district where the buildings were made of blood and concrete. His voice rose higher, overlaying the broadcast noise. "Where is she? Where's she going?" The orderly tried to calm him down, but the commander pushed back against the wheelchair, his eyes never leaving the screen. "That's my combat medic. That's the woman who..." His voice broke. He couldn't finish. The security guard who had escorted Rachel out of Seattle General yesterday, the one with the Marines United decal on his locker, went rigid. He was standing by the information desk when he saw the photograph, and the color drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug in his skull. He'd watched her walk out that door with her head high and her composure intact. He'd seen the humiliation in her eyes that she wouldn't let anyone witness. He'd felt the weight of it, the wrongness of it, the sickening knowledge that they'd fired someone and he'd never known why. Now he knew. Now everyone knew. He turned to the crowd assembling around the screens, his voice cutting through the noise like a Humvee engine. "That woman is a Master Chief Petty Officer, you stupid sons of bitches. That's a Navy Cross recipient. That's the woman we threw out like garbage yesterday." His face was flushed, eyes wet. A Marine recognizing a fallen warrior, not dead, but close enough. He pointed toward the elevator bank where security had escorted her out 24 hours earlier. "That's a decorated war hero. And Dr. Whitfield fired her." The sliding doors opened before anyone could respond. A 2-star general in dress uniform walked through the entrance carrying a file folder thick enough to kill a man. The lobby went deeper into silence, the kind of quiet that only happens when institutional power walks in wearing 4 stars and perfect brass. General Marcus Tate, United States Marine Corps. The general's eye scanned the crowd once, efficient as a predator, then found Whitfield standing near the elevator bank pretending to check his phone. The general descended the stairs with his spine straight and his pace even, a metronome of authority. His voice was level, controlled, the kind of calm that comes from having given orders that sent men into firefights. "Dr. Whitfield. I'm General Marcus Tate. I understand you terminated Master Chief Torres yesterday on the grounds of credential deficiency and patient safety concerns." Whitfield's mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish drowning in air. We followed protocol. There were documentation issues. She couldn't verify her background. The hospital has policies." The general cut him off with a single raised hand. "You're fired. Effective immediately." Whitfield blinked. "You can't, you don't have authority." The hospital CEO, Edward Chen, pushed through the crowd. His face was flushed, his jaw set. "Dr. Whitfield, you're terminated for cause, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Your privileges are suspended pending investigation." His voice was ice. 3 news vans were visible through the lobby windows now, cameras being unpacked on the sidewalk. Someone in the crowd was live streaming, the phone was pointed directly at Whitfield's face like a weapon. The general stood silent for a moment, letting the weight of the moment settle. Then, and you'll be doing your exit interview on camera, Doctor. The American people deserve to hear exactly how you treated a decorated war hero. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The commander lifted his arm as Whitfield moved toward the exit, his forearm exposed. The tattoo was visible from 30 feet away, Rachel's full name in bold black letters, inked the day she carried him through a Baghdad firefight, the day she became the only thing between him and bleeding out on desert concrete. His voice broke as he spoke, loud enough for every person in the lobby to hear. She carried me 6 miles with a shattered spine while taking fire. And you people threw her out like garbage. She saved my life and you threw her out. Tears ran down his face. His hands trembled, but not from fear. From rage. From gratitude finally having a place to land. The silence lasted exactly 10 seconds. Then the general turned to face Whitfield directly, and his face was the color of old snow, the kind of white that comes from all the blood draining away at once. The general's voice was quiet, surgical. You're done, Doctor. Your career is done. Your credibility is done. Your freedom from federal investigation is done. I suggest you find an attorney. The same security guard, the Marine vet, stepped forward with his chest expanded like a rooster. Sir, I'll handle the escort. His voice was granite. Whitfield walked toward the exit flanked by security, past 100 silent faces, past the commander still sitting in his transport chair with his arm extended and his tattoo visible to everyone, past the nurses who'd watched the grand round's humiliation and the vending machine mockery and said nothing. The automatic doors opened to camera flashes and shouted questions. A reporter shoved a microphone forward. Dr. Whitfield, is it true you fired a Navy Cross recipient? Another voice overlapped. Did you know about her military service? The guard walked him past the cameras to the parking lot, handed him his keys, stepped back. Whitfield sat in his Lexus with the engine running and his hands shaking on the steering wheel. His phone began to explode. Text from his attorney, State Medical Board opening investigation into imaging center billing practices. Do not speak to press. Email from hospital legal, all clinical privileges suspended pending review. Surrender credentials by close of business. Voicemail from his business partner, FBI just showed up with a warrant, Richard. What the hell did you do? By 1400 hours, the live stream had 40,000 views. By 1700, it was on 6 major news networks. Hospital fires Navy Cross recipient despite decorated service record. By 2100, federal investigators were photographing his lake house while real estate agents placed a for sale sign in the yard. The imaging center kickbacks had funded that house for 4 years. The house was worth $847,000. By midnight, his attorney was explaining that the legal fees would consume most of it. 5 months later, an envelope arrived at Rachel's apartment with no return address. Inside, a single photograph on glossy paper, high resolution. Whitfield sat at a folding card table in a strip mall parking lot next to a tax preparation place and a dollar store. Behind him, a vinyl banner reading discount insurance, compare and save in red and blue letters. He wore a short-sleeve button-down and a clip-on tie. Plastic brochure holders surrounded him like soldiers. A cash box sat on the table, probably holding 1s and 5s. His minivan was parked behind him with the door hanging crooked on its hinges. Rachel studied the photograph at her kitchen table in the early morning quiet, coffee steaming in a chipped mug. The medical license suspension had made page 6 of the Houston Chronicle. The federal investigation into billing fraud had made page 3. The forced sale of the lake house to pay legal fees had made a healthcare industry blog nobody important read. But this photograph, this said everything words couldn't. This said what happens to people who build lives on lies. She slid the photo into her desk drawer next to the tarnished challenge coin, next to her Master Chief Petty Officer insignia that no longer needed to hide, next to the DD-214 discharge papers that were finally no longer classified. Paperclipped to the stack, the commander's recovery chart from Seattle General. 12 weeks of physical therapy notes documenting his return to active duty. His progress charted in her handwriting. And a handwritten note on Marine Corps letterhead in precise block letters, "Thank you, Valkyrie." She pinned her Master Chief insignia to her new uniform, the one she'd start wearing at Walter Reed Medical Center on Monday, official orders signed by General Tate himself, full rank restored, full benefits reinstated, and a position in combat trauma medicine where her hands could keep doing what they'd always known how to do. She'd never stopped being a Master Chief. She'd just been pretending for 5 months while the system tried to erase her. On her desk sat a framed photograph from Baghdad. Her old unit. 23 faces staring at the camera, desert sun bleaching the colors to bone white. She was third from the left, younger, harder, carrying 60 pounds of medical gear and the weight of keeping people alive. The woman who carried wounded Marines through firefights. The woman who performed a pericardiocentesis with her hand steady as surgical lasers while doctors froze in panic. The woman who existed all along, even when everyone told her she didn't exist at all. Before leaving her apartment for the last time, she scribbled a post-it note and stuck it to her bathroom mirror, something General Tate said in the hospital lobby, something that needed to be tattooed inside her brain. True class is what you do when the lights go out. She'd learned that lesson twice now. Once in Baghdad. Once in Houston. She walked into the daylight wearing her real name again. What happened next didn't just silence the room. It brought the hospital to its knees. If you believe that competence, honor, and hidden strength should be recognized instead of buried, like this video and subscribe so you never miss another story about the warriors walking among us that nobody remembers. Comment below, would you have saved him, or walked away?